So, I purchased the M2 MacBook Air in November of 2024 after experiencing 4 years of trauma with an Asus VivoBook 15. That thing was barely fast enough to run a YouTube video. Bear in mind that I do have a powerful Windows PC, so my experience with Windows isn't biased because of the poor performance on my previous laptop. This MacBook Air is spec'd with 16GB of memory and 256GB of storage, as well as the 8-core CPU and 8-core GPU version of M2, all for the price of $749 US. Before this MacBook Air, I did actually buy the same model a week earlier, with 8GB of memory and 256GB of storage. When a deal came for a 16GB variant, I could not pass up. The puny 8GB of memory constantly used swap memory when using Chrome, Discord, and Spotify at once. Though a slowdown wasn't really detectable, it's nice knowing you have headroom and can push the machine even further. What first impressed me when taking the laptop out of the box was the sheer thinness of it. It almost looked like a glorified iPad. Despite its thin and small size, build quality felt very solid and did not feel like it was going to fall apart anytime soon. I instantly knew that the 13-inch size I got was perfect. At just 2.7 pounds, this is probably one of the best portable laptops that you can buy, whether that's the M3, M4, or the M2 variant. They all have the same outer design. The color option that I ultimately chose was silver. Originally, space gray crossed my mind as perhaps the greatest color that I could get. However, the longevity of this device is what skewed me towards getting a silver model. Since I would like to keep the laptop for at least 5 years, I felt like I had the peace of mind knowing that scratches and chips wouldn't be as visible on the silver version compared to the space gray version. On the side, you will see 2 Thunderbolt 3 ports, a MagSafe charging port, and a 3.5mm headphone jack with support for high-impedance headphones. If you don't have your MagSafe cable for whatever reason, the 2 Thunderbolt ports also support charging, so any USB-C cable would work fine. Once you open the lid, you'll see that the display is decent. It is a liquid retina display with IPS technology, as Apple says, rated for up to 500 nits. The screen is not as good as the MacBook Pros, with their mini LED display, especially when viewing images with high contrast. However, it is a good display for the majority of users. The 2560 by 1664 resolution is good for viewing crisp content on the display. The individual pixels are not really visible unless you get up close and go pixel peeping. Some users find the notch annoying, but I find it to kind of fade away into the background, since you're not always staring at the top of your screen. Plus, the menu bar is already there, meaning that the notch doesn't necessarily block out the content that you're viewing on your screen. And it also gives the MacBook its own kind of unique identity. The quad speaker system is nice and loud, more than enough for the average user. Though it doesn't thump like the MacBook Pros, it is still enough that it isn't unpleasant to listen to music directly from the speakers. Considering that they are hidden between the 2 hinges on either sides of the screen, I would give them a decent rating. Aside from listening to others, you also want others to hear you. The MacBook Air has a 3-microphone array that sounds great. Almost no laptop in its class sounds as good as the MacBook lineup. Apparently, the MacBook Air's mic location is situated inside the chassis, with no holes, so you can't really physically see it. And if others are listening to you, well then they'd probably also be better off looking at you too. The MacBook Air comes with a 1080p FaceTime HD camera with an advanced image signal processor and computational video. I did notice a little bit of skin smoothing when using the webcam, but again, there's nothing to complain about on the webcam side of things. One of the other things that you'll be using a lot on this laptop will be its keyboard. Personally, I think this laptop's keyboard is great for typing fast and smaller bursts. However, I find typing on it for a long time not particularly comfortable or rewarding, but it's a fast keyboard though, I'll give it that. My favorite thing about the keyboard is definitely the Touch ID. It gives you instant access to payments, locked documents, and other things that usually require a password. Instead, you could just tap your finger on the sensor, which is unlocking a whole new level of convenience. The last piece of hardware is the trackpad. This is definitely a best-in-class trackpad. The trackpad is large and has a nice palm rejection when typing. Additionally, instead of actually pressing down, the trackpad simulates the click with a very satisfying haptic. As someone who has never particularly used macOS before, I found it fairly easy to understand. Now, to be fair, I do know many of the basics of macOS already just from watching many people using it on YouTube. But the thing is, you have to tell yourself not to think of macOS as Windows, but more of macOS as its own thing. The 2 operating systems have vast differences, so trying to implement the same steps to achieve the same end result is a recipe for disaster. Some differences I found coming from a Windows computer was that the UI was much more consistent and streamlined. On Windows, you could find find 20-year-old menus while also having completely renovated Windows 11 apps. Some apps don't have dark mode, so you will get your eyes blinded by light brighter than the sun at night. You could even find duplicate apps like Settings and Control Panel, which both ultimately have the same end goal, to let the user change settings. Some people will probably go like, oh, well, macOS is for babies, so that's why there's so few options to customize. On Windows, you'll have the option for everything. In a sense, that is true, but macOS's experience is just much more slick and organized compared to some of the messed up part of Windows. Now to the complaints I first had about macOS. Firstly, instead of the traditional X, maximize, and minimize icons on Windows, you have the horizontal traffic lights. Red indicates close, yellow indicates minimize, and green indicates maximize. But here's the catch. Pressing the red button doesn't actually quit the app. You can see that the app is still open with the tiny dot underneath the app icon in the dock. Pressing the red button essentially removes the window from view but doesn't necessarily quit the app. If you want to quit the app, you must press the name of the app in the menu bar, then press quit, or just use Command Q, since keyboard shortcuts are much faster anyways. The yellow button on the other hand also removes the app from view while keeping it and whatever work you have active. For example, using the red button to close Google Chrome keeps the app running but all of your tabs and work are removed. But pressing the yellow button keeps all of your tabs and work open, but it's removed out of your view. The green button on the other hand maximizes your screen entirely. The menu bar and dock disappear, creating a more focused environment. Lastly, Finder is obnoxious when I want to cut and paste files. Compared to File Explorer, Finder on Mac is a lot more drag and drop based. For example, instead of cutting and pasting, you would probably select the files you want to cut and just move it into its new location. Alternatively, you can achieve the same result by using Command C to copy and then Command Option V to move it to its new location. Some weird gimmicks like this for basic tasks that seem simple on Windows can be very frustrating. Here's the part where I talk about how I live with the MacBook Air. Firstly, the efficiency is amazing. With the new Apple Silicon chips, MacBooks have been top performers in their segment in terms of efficiency. I consistently got more than 10 hours of battery life on this MacBook, which is more than what I will be spending on my computer without charging anyways. If you're someone who likes to go out to coffee shops to do work, the battery on this won't let you down. Currently, after 5 months, I'm sitting at 86 charge cycles with 100% battery health. Not only is the laptop efficient, it also flies through the tasks that I throw at it. Compared to my old Asus VivoBook, this thing is light years ahead. Whether you're doing some casual gaming, video editing, or document typing, the M2 generally excels at it. Obviously, you do reach your limitations at some point, such as when you tried to add too many fusion effects in DaVinci Resolve. But it also makes sense, because your laptop wasn't made for intense workflows like that. That's what the MacBook Pro is for. Additionally, the MacBook Air ships with the fanless design, allowing it to be so quiet and thin at the same time. Since the MacBook Air was not produced to be an intense workhorse machine, going fanless was the right choice in my opinion. Some think that having a fanless design will make the machine overheat, and that is somewhat true, but I don't notice the computer getting unnaturally hot when using it like an average person. I only really feel the warmth when I play games for prolonged sessions. Throttling is not particularly noticeable, but it does happen once the computer gets very warm. Onto the durability, the computer is still solid and doesn't have any major damage, but definitely more than I would have anticipated. On the bright side of the MacBook, there were a couple of small dents and chips after I put it into a backpack that didn't have a laptop sleeve. Performance-wise, everything is still as good as day one. I expect to use the laptop for the next 4 years to come.